She hasn't hit a single ball yet. And already, the biggest stadium in Canadian tennis has nothing left to sell. Not a seat. Not a standing spot. Not a scrap of hope for anyone who waited too long to buy a ticket. So how does a 21-year-old who only just cracked the top 20 in the world, who has never lifted a Grand Slam trophy, who wasn't even supposed to be this summer's biggest story, manage to sell out a session in Toronto the way almost nobody has in 20 years, not the defending champions, not the sport's biggest names, nobody. Something is happening here that has nothing to do with rankings. And by the time this video is over, you'll understand exactly what it is, and exactly why the players left in this draw should be nervous. Let's call her Alex, because by the end of this story, you won't need her last name to know exactly who she is. But before we get into it, if this is the kind of story you want to keep following, do one thing for me. Hit that subscribe button right now. Not because we're asking you to. Because somewhere in the Philippines, a kid is watching this same rise happen in real time, the way an entire generation once watched a young boxer from a fishing village become the pride of a nation. If you want to say you were here from the beginning when this story reaches its biggest chapter yet, subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's go through this one together. Rewind 3 days. Washington, D.C. The sky is doing something almost biblical, thunder cracking over the courts, rain coming down in sheets, play suspended, not once, but twice. Somewhere under that storm, a young woman from Manila is standing 2 points away from the biggest win of her career. She has already beaten an Olympic gold medalist that week. She has already beaten a defending champion. She has already beaten a 4-time Grand Slam winner. And now, across the net, stands the world number 3. And the storm will not let this match end. When play finally resumes, when the ball finally lands exactly where it needs to land, Alex doesn't celebrate like someone who expected it. She freezes for a second, like her body hasn't caught up with what just happened. That's the moment. That's the win. Her first WTA singles title. A new career high ranking. The first Philippine tennis player, man or woman, to ever lift a WTA trophy. And she gets less than a full day to feel it. Because barely 48 hours later, she's expected on a different court, in a different country, against a different opponent, in a tournament that does not care how tired her legs are. This is the part nobody tells you about professional sports. The celebration doesn't pause the clock. The plane is already boarding. Toronto is already waiting. And here's where the story should slow down, should give her room to breathe. Except it doesn't. Because while Alex is somewhere over Lake Ontario trying to convince her body it isn't exhausted, something extraordinary is happening on the ground below her, and she doesn't know about it yet. The moment tournament organizers confirmed she was scheduled for Wednesday night, tickets for that session sold out in 30 minutes. Not for the finals. Not for a marquee matchup. For an opening round match against an opponent most casual fans have never heard of. Organizers had originally slotted her onto the tournament's smaller grandstand court, which seats 2,800 people. It wasn't enough. The tournament director admitted publicly that she'd probably sold upwards of 5,000 tickets on her own, and they had to move her onto the main stage at Sobeys Stadium, a venue that holds 12,500 people. By the time the lights came up on Wednesday night, over 10,000 fans had packed into that stadium. And according to people who track this sport closely, a Wednesday night sellout like that hadn't happened in Toronto in 20 years, not for Federer, not for Nadal, not for Djokovic. The only name that had ever pulled off something similar was Serena Williams. So who is filling that stadium? Follow the trail, and it doesn't lead where you'd expect. It doesn't lead to tennis diehards who followed the sport for decades. It leads to Toronto's Filipino community, one of the largest concentrations of the diaspora anywhere outside the Philippines. And once you understand what this community has been doing all year, every impossible sellout stops being a mystery and starts being inevitable. Rewind again, all the way back to January. Melbourne. The Australian Open. Tournament organizers made a decision that, in hindsight, looks almost comically wrong. They placed Alex's first-round match on court 6, a mid-sized outside court. What happened next wasn't a crowd. It was a flood. Queues stretched back toward the main arena. Fans who couldn't get in were turned away entirely, left to watch on big screens outside. It got so chaotic that Martina Navratilova, a legend who has seen every kind of tennis fandom there is, publicly said the tournament had made a scheduling mistake. One tennis journalist simply wrote that putting her on court 6 was, in his words, dumb. And Alex lost that match. She won the first set 6-love, and then Alycia Parks, the American across the net, clawed all the way back to win it in 3. That loss never left her. And everyone in Toronto was about to find out exactly how much it had changed her. Because here's the twist nobody outside her camp expected. This wasn't going to be a clean, easy revenge story. It was going to be a fight. Set 1 told a completely different story than January. Alex came out sharp, controlled, relentless, closing it out 6-1 without ever facing a single break point. The crowd, wall-to-wall Filipino flags, was already on its feet. Then Parks reminded everyone exactly why she's dangerous. She shares the record for the fastest serve in WTA history, 129 miles per hour, a mark she set at the US Open and shares with Venus Williams. Parks dug in, broke Alex to love in the 10th game of the second set, and leveled the match at 6-4. For a moment, it looked like Melbourne all over again. Alex broke immediately to open the third set. Parks broke straight back to level it at 2-2. And then, in the tensest stretch of the match, Alex found something she couldn't find in January. She won the final 4 games in a row to close it out, 6-1, 4-6, 6-2. The numbers tell you how she did it. She created 14 breakpoint chances across the match to Parks's 2, a staggering gap in the pressure she applied. With that win, Alex became the first Filipino player, male or female, to win a main draw match at that tournament in its more than 100-year history. But here's the part that should genuinely worry the rest of the draw. This wasn't a one-off run of form. Earlier that same week, the chairman of the Washington tournament revealed something remarkable to reporters, that despite a field packed with major champions and former world number 1s, at least 80% of every single ticket inquiry his office received was about one player. Her. Not the defending champion. Not the top seed. Her. And it isn't only happening in North America. Weeks earlier at Wimbledon, the most tradition-bound, reserved tournament on the calendar, Alex walked onto center court as a 29 seed against the defending champion, Iga Swiatek. Almost nobody gave her a real chance. She won a first set that lasted close to 90 minutes, survived a brutal tiebreak, and closed it out 7-6, 6-2 to become the first player from the Philippines to ever reach the second week of a Grand Slam. Every single stop, the pattern repeats and intensifies. Melbourne. Washington. Wimbledon. Now Toronto. And each time, tournament organizers are caught flat-footed, scrambling to understand a phenomenon that traditional scouting reports never saw coming, because scouting reports measure forehands and rankings. They don't measure what happens when a diaspora that has spent decades feeling scattered suddenly finds one person who carries their flag onto the biggest stages in the world and refuses to put it down. Now bring the story back to Wednesday night. Toronto. Sobeys Stadium, sold out. Because a sold-out crowd isn't just a number, it's pressure with a heartbeat. And Alex just walked into it carrying more than fatigue from Washington. She walked into it carrying 7 months of unfinished business against the one player who had already seen her break. And she got it. She beat the ghost. She avenged Melbourne in front of the exact community that once flooded a mid-sized outside court just to watch her lose. Here's the tension nobody's talking about yet, though. Beating Parks was barely the hard part. Because on the other side of this draw sits the reigning Wimbledon champion, a player who has already beaten Alex twice this season, including a defeat that still stings from earlier in the year. If these two collide again in Toronto, it won't just be another match. It will be the biggest test yet of whether this version of Alex, the one who just neutralized the fastest server in the sport in front of 10,000 of her own fans, can also solve the one player who has consistently had her number all year. And stack the physical reality on top of the emotional one, because this is where the story stops being inspiring and starts being almost unbelievable. 5 matches in 5 days in Washington. A final that stretched across 2 separate days because of the storm. Barely a day to fly, to recover, to reset, before facing a player who's beaten her before, in a stadium louder and more expectant than anything she experienced in D.C. Any rational assessment says she should have been running on fumes. She wasn't. And this is the part where the story stops being about one match entirely, because Toronto isn't the finish line. It's a single stepping stone on a schedule that gives her almost no room to exhale. After this, it's straight into Cincinnati, another top-tier event barely a week later. After that, the US Open, the biggest stage in American tennis, the tournament where careers get made or quietly buried under the weight of expectation. So here's where this all lands. A 21-year-old who only just cracked the top 20 just produced a Toronto sellout that tournament staff say they haven't seen the equal of in 2 decades. She did it not because people are saying goodbye to her, but because an entire diaspora has decided she is impossible to miss. Every stadium she walks into now writes a new chapter in a story that started on a small outside court in Melbourne with a security line stretching into the distance. But here's the question this story actually leaves you with, the one that matters more than any scoreline from Toronto. What happens when the pressure stops being something she survives, and starts being something she needs? Because if the last 7 months are any indication, Alex doesn't wilt under the weight of a sold-out stadium chanting her name. She seems to feed on it. And if that's true, if this really is only the beginning, the way it looked in Melbourne, the way it sounded in Washington, the way it echoed through Wimbledon, then Toronto isn't the peak of this story at all. It's just the loudest chapter so far, in a book that is nowhere close to finished. If you want to be there the moment this story hits its next chapter, the possible rematch waiting for her deeper in this draw, the road through Cincinnati, the run at the US Open, subscribe right now and turn on notifications. Because what happens next might be the biggest few weeks in Philippine sports history, and we're going to bring you every second of it.